From Perth, Australia, and broadcasting around the world, you're listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. The O Show is a no-nonsense podcast bringing you the best advice on training, mindset, and nutrition to supercharge your efforts in the gym, the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. Don't forget to share this episode on your social media. Now, let's get to it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's episode of The O Show. I'm your host, Oren McCory, and today I have on special guest, Dean McKillop. Dean, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you for having me on, Oren, now that I know how to pronounce your name. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we had to clarify that before we jumped on. Instagram doesn't make it easy to work this out. You know, I actually used to have in my bio, instead of saying like coach, which transforms people's lives or whatever, I used to have pronounced O-R-I-N.
You need to have like the phonetic part inside brackets or something.
Yeah. I used to have that, and then I was like, oh, that doesn't really look professional. So I was just like, oh, fuck it.
It's still better than just calling yourself Orange, you know, just to get the closest proximity to what your name is without the D and the H.
Well, that's it. Well, mate, it's good to have you on the podcast. Obviously, we connected a while ago. You contributed an article to the Australia Unites ebook that we did at the start of 2020. Now, it seems like ages ago, but I've been following your progress. Obviously, you're one of Australia's top coaches, in my opinion, and one of the top bodybuilders. And you do some awesome work with your clients. You put out a great podcast. So I thought it'd be a great episode to get you jumping on and talking about the kind of work you do. And I think we're going to decide we're going to talk a bit about off seasons, because you're just coming off the back of a very successful off season, getting ready to diet for a show later in the year, I think. So we can dive into that and just give some good value to the listeners today.
Sounds good to me, man. It's been a painful off season. So actually, it's been the first off season, if I'm honest.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about that.
I've always joked and called myself a hobby builder. I've never been prepared to call myself a bodybuilder, because like I started out lifting because I enjoy it. Actually, I started out lifting because I was finishing my degree at UQ here in Queensland. And I was going from being a soccer player wanting to play professional football at the age of, 16 through 20, to then giving up on that and going, I need to go to uni and learn some shit so I don't become a landscaper, because I did that for a few months to make some money and hated it, right?
Okay, yeah.
I sound like a princess. I am. So I was finishing my degree and we had to do prac hours, right? And we could either go into like the clinical setting and do musculoskeletal rehab and like all of this sort of stuff, or you could just be like a straight up exercise scientist instead of exercise physiologist. And that meant you could do your 400 hours wherever you wanted. And I was like, sweet, lock me in on strength and conditioning. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I got lucky and got a gig at the Brisbane Broncos, which is an NRL professional rugby league team. And I was like, man, I'm like 75 kilos and skinny. There's no way these guys are going to take me seriously if I'm trying to tell them how to lift weights. Yeah. So I should probably pull my finger out and like have a crack at that. So I quit soccer and then gave myself, I think like 4 months or something like that before I was about to go for prac, and just ate and trained myself as much as I could. Put on a bunch of weight. I think I put on like 13 kilos.
Nice. In
that 3 months. And then that's how the sort of strength and conditioning and training and my interest around periodizing and programming for groups. And ever since then, I kind of just trained for fun, right? And then it was only one of those things, like coming back from a competitive background, training was fun, but then I thought like training requires a purpose, and that purpose for me should be to compete in something. Mm-hmm. And I fell in through the bodybuilding cracks through like different people. And my missus, who's now my wife at the time, was like, just fucking have a go, mate. Like, stop talking about it. Yeah. So I competed, and that was back in 2014. And I kind of enjoyed it, but I thought, that takes a lot out of your life. So then I just went back to training for fun. And then I think it was maybe like, I'm going to say like 35 or 30 weeks out from the 2018 shows. And I was currently getting mentorship from Broderick Chavez, who's really well known in the pharmacological space in America. And he was like, you going to do a prep with me or what? And I was like, oh yeah, you can do my, my pharmacy side of things. And I was like, fuck it, I'll do it again. So like between 2014 and when I decided to prep for the first show, it was like 20 weeks out. And I was like, I better start eating and training like properly, Yeah. So that was like a 20-week prep, including a growth phase of all the 4 weeks. And then the 2018 show was like maybe like 8 weeks of growing, followed by like 16 weeks of dieting. And then ever since then, up until now, previous to this off season that I've just done, I've always just trained for fun, but never fully taken it seriously.
Yeah.
Whereas this has been a dedicated 25 weeks of relentless consistency. So up until now, I'd call myself a bodybuilder for this season, but up until now, I've called myself a hobby builder for that very reason. And I really only turn it on around prep time.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of this first run as a bodybuilder, what have you accomplished in that 25-week period? Where did you start and where have you ended up now?
Yeah, so for some context, like last prep, I started prep at 97 kilos, got up to about 102 or 103, I think, in that little 8-week push or whatever it was, and then competed at 89. And then this prep, I started at 101, but that was after recomping back on 10 kilos from COVID. Because when COVID hit, I was kind of looking for an excuse not to train.
Yep.
I didn't train for 8 weeks pretty much. Was very lazy with my supplementation, barely ate. I ended up getting down to 91.5 kilos.
Right, okay.
And my watch was loose and my wedding ring was real loose. And I was like, oh, this is embarrassing, you know? And so then, sorry, if people that watch on YouTube, got something in my eye all of a sudden. So I recomped 10 kilos back on, and then I joined up with my coach, Joe Jeffries from the UK. And I've gone from 100.5 to 113.5 in the last 26 weeks. Yeah.
Nice. That's solid, man. That's solid. And what is it like in terms of the difference in what you've done before to now? What are the sort of, what's led to that 13 kilo gain there?
And in all honesty, it's probably just been the first time that I've trained and eaten as equally, like, intently as I have in a prep in an off season.
Yeah.
So like the reason why I joined up with Joe was because I was training 3 to 4 times per week. I was finding excuses to miss sessions because I'd rather work and look after clients. You know, I'd eat sometimes 2,000 calories, sometimes 3,500. And I was just kind of floating around just like in no man's land. And then I've always said I may compete again. I've never said I'll definitely will. And then, but I knew that like being 89 and a bit last time, that if I was to compete again, that I had to be heavier than what I was to start with. So I had to be heavier than 105, and I needed to then go into the under 100s, which means I'm going to make some kilos up real quick. And the reason why I'd kind of taken it lackadaisy for years is because I knew that for me to compete in the under 100s, I really need to be greater than 110 in pretty good shape in order to come in at like 95 plus. And I knew that was going to take some consistent effort. And I've never liked bodybuilding interfering with my life except for prep. Like I've just not been prepared to give up some of the niceties of like being lazy or being lax on it. So this time it's just literally, man, I joined up with Joe and I've eaten pretty much, give or take, probably 80% the same food for 26 weeks. I've trained every week, 5 days a week, no question. I've progressed everything as much as I possibly can. I've been just on it, man, like as much as I could. And lo and behold, here I am at the weight category that I need to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just one of those things, man. It takes a lot of consistent, relentless consistency, to use that word twice.
So in terms of like what you've achieved and everything that's within it, now obviously you're like a successful coach over here yourself, and I think what holds a lot of people back with an off season is they sign up with people for preps or for a diet for a holiday or whatever it is, depending on what their goal is. But then they just say, oh, I'll go away and do my own thing for off season, or now that I've achieved this look that I'm happy with. You're obviously a respected coach yourself. What made you seek out another coach to help you go to that next level? Can you talk about that decision process a bit? The biggest thing for me was, so when I did my first prep, I had a friend that overlooked it. I wouldn't say he coached me in hindsight. Funnily enough, it actually probably helped me start my business, or our business, I should say, with Liz and I, because I started building sheets and tracking data and stuff like that because he had none of it. Yeah, okay.
He was a really terrible coach, but had good information, you know? Yeah. So for me now, I just really wanted to be able to like trust and divorce myself from the process. Yeah. I'm like very internally motivated or intrinsically motivated, but I also find it very difficult to let people down that I respect. So I knew once that I pulled the trigger and went, I'm going to go to this guy and I'm going to get him to do my stuff, that I'd just flip the switch and basically go for it. Yeah. And really what I needed at that time was the accountability and the trust in somebody that would just say, do this, so that I could just implement without having to think about it. Mm-hmm. Like I did my own prep last time. I actually didn't find it that difficult from an organizational perspective.
Yeah.
But the off season's probably been harder for me because I'm naturally not a big eater. I don't get fat very easy, and I think that sort of ties into the fact that I've just always been very active and eaten fairly well as a kid. So I knew it was going to take someone to basically push me to get uncomfortable or be comfortable with being uncomfortable, you know?
Yeah.
It was mainly accountability. And then also Joe's got a tremendous amount of knowledge that I wanted to learn from. So I was interested to see how somebody else did it. Like you said, like I coach people myself, and we often, especially when you get good at it, and then people come in your service, you often get a biased self-selection of people that are very like-minded to you, that already like what you say and will do what you say. So you can somewhat become a worse coach over time.
Yeah, okay.
Or a less developed coach maybe, or a less well-rounded coach, unless you seek education, which I do.
Yeah.
But I think it's really easy for people to become worse. And I just was interested to see how other people do it.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
So
you put your trust in another coach, and that's resulted in actually hitting the numbers that you wanted to hit. Now, when you started the process, did you think that this was possible this time around, or did you think, you might get close to it, but maybe not hit that sort of 110 to 115 that you were talking about?
I thought I'd hit 110. I'm very surprised I made it to 114 and a half momentarily. So I call it 113 and a half because that's kind of my average. It was 113.7.
Yep.
I'm surprised I hit that without accumulating more fat than I did.
Yeah.
So that's probably what surprised me. But this will sound a bit dicky, but because I've never fully applied myself in the off season, but I know what I'm capable of. I was going in with it knowing that I probably had the potential to push to it. I just wasn't sure how uncomfortable it was going to get.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So how uncomfortable did it get? Like you said, you're not a big eater. How high did calories end up having to be pushed?
I'm still on the highest now. They'll probably hold for another week or so just to sort of settle in on this weight. But it was 5,900 calories,
right,
1,000 grams of carbs, 300 grams of protein, 70 grams of fat.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's big numbers.
Yeah. And like the thing that's been a validation, I think, of thoughts that I've had in the past, because I've never pushed food before, but I've made people push food.
Yeah.
You know, like I've pushed people up in the vicinity of 1,250 grams of carbs a day. Is that it's still possible to eat an abundance of fruit and vegetables. And if anything, it probably makes the process of digestion better and easier to get more food in. Whereas I think there's a misconception that when people's calories rise, they tend to go for more energy dense foods, thinking like, you know, less volume of food, easy to get it in.
Yeah.
But in doing so, they remove a whole bunch of an abundance of plant-based fiber that keeps gastric motility consistent.
Yeah.
So then they're forever full, but they also don't get clearance. Whereas like I eat, get clearance, and then eat again. I'm always full, but I'm always getting clearance.
Yeah.
So I still, man, even now, like today's food, because I eat pretty much the same thing every day, it's like 700 grams of fruit and 750 grams of vegetables a day.
Wow. Okay. That's big numbers, man.
There's still 1.5 kilos of plant matter going in on top to hit that carbs.
Yeah.
And like the only super simple, I have like 40 grams of carbs in one drink, 50 in the intra, and then honey.
Yeah.
The rest of it's basically rice.
Right.
cereal.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
How has that made it with trying to fit in a lot of your calories from like one food source like rice like that? Have you found you've got quite sick of it, or do you just enjoy eating rice?
We've sort of slowly phased it, you know, like, but I find rice super palatable and really easy to digest.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm quite okay with it. I use a bit of cereal too, though, like 250 grams of cereal in that. And then one meal is a rice flour meal, so it's more like cream of rice.
Yeah.
So, and I think like, you know, like one meal is rice and then the second meal is rice, but it's slightly different food. So it tastes a bit different. Then it's cereal, then it's like a meat and rice, and then it's back to a rice flour. So it's kind of always interchanged. So it doesn't seem like it's the same thing all the time.
Okay. Yeah. I got you. And then in terms of cereal, what's your go-to cereal of choice? This is one that I wanted to ask you coming on here, because I remember seeing you out for a hike or somewhere up in the forest with Lizzie, and you had your Ziploc bag of cereal and you were still getting it in.
Yeah, that was honey Cheerios mixed with Nesquik Cocoa Bomb type things.
Okay, yeah.
Man, I honestly just picked the one that's like the lowest fat, the highest carb, and the best price.
Yep, that's
But
fair.
the Nesquik one was recently 50% off. So my missus bought like 7 boxes.
Oh, nice.
So I've just been running chocolate Nesquik cereal for the last month and a half or so.
Yeah, nice. And then do you have a number in terms of when you said low fat? Is there a number that you'd like to keep it under for that portion that you're going for?
As a coach, I typically keep people around 0.7 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Yep.
I'll have an allowance of up to 1 gram per kilogram if they're really struggling with food volume. But that's roughly my number, usually like 0.7, which works out to be similar for me right now.
Yep.
I've actually never asked Joe why he goes for that number, but I would imagine it's probably a fairly similar like reason.
Yeah.
We cover all those bases of like getting in an abundance of polyunsaturated fats and some fish oils, and he likes salmon, I don't, so then I like supplement up my fish oil. And then once you've done those sort of essential fats, like the rest of it's really palatability. It's not really physiologically beneficial as far as you ask me.
Yeah. And then with yourself, and then separate question with clients, do you believe in nutrient timing and like keeping carbs and fats separate, or do you just let clients sort of do what fits their lifestyle, or what's your own thoughts on that?
For the most part, I'd say fit the lifestyle. I think as food availability goes up, the necessity for timing goes down.
Yeah.
Because you're just kind of always in a constant state of being somewhat fed.
Yeah.
I have no issue with fats and carbs going in the same meal whatsoever, unless for whatever reason you're trying to drive carbohydrates in for, glycogen reuptake post-workout at speed for a particular athletic goal.
Mm-hmm.
But like I don't have those people, so no issue with combining those. As a general rule, no. Like the only time I'll start to time food specifically will be like in a peak week. If they're going to train, I want them to get a certain amount of carbs in post-workout to maximize that reuptake, like I mentioned before. If somebody's very low calories and we're trying to drive performance, then there'd be some carbohydrates pre. And then the other one would be is as volume and training demands rise, I typically will start to add like an intra just to maintain performance, because there's an abundance of literature on something that's both calorific and sweet, improving strength and repeat bout performance stuff. So, but from a food perspective, not so much, man.
Yeah, cool. So you don't have any parameters in terms of like post-workout with most of your clients then, in terms of, try to keep your fat under this amount for this meal? Because I know it's quite popular, but most coaches sit either one side of the fence, right? Where it's do what you want, what suits you. And then some people are like, nah, you need to keep them separate.
I've never told anyone not to have fat in a meal, I don't think, specifically. By default, if I'm like teaching people as I coach them, they probably like work towards having an abundance of carbohydrates with a very low fat content in the post-workout meal. Mm-hmm. Just because it's typically easier to digest that food post-training. And then we want that to clear so that they can then get another meal in. And I might say start to put fats earlier in the day if the carbohydrate load isn't as high. But no, most of the time, man, it's honestly just personal preference.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And do you have any other sort of nutritional strategies, and particularly with the off season, since that's what we're talking about, like to make food easier? So say, for example, you put a client, I think you said you pushed as high as 1250 grams of carbs. How do you make that easy for the client? Because that's a number that a lot of people, you give somebody 500 grams of carbs, they'll probably struggle, never mind 1250. So what's your thoughts or different strategies on getting carbs that high?
And it's funny you said 500, because I was watching a Fuad Abiyad podcast just before. And he said something like that. So like, if you get to 500, is that when you start to consider putting in liquids? I was like, what the hell, man? 500 is nothing, especially for a guy of your size. But as for strategies, I think we can reverse engineer the like coin termed by Renaissance periodization, which is the hedonic staircase, which essentially says like as calories get lower, make your food less palatable in order to make it sort of a little bit more boring, to drive down some of that sort of more hedonic sort of reward seeking behavior based eating. So where you're seeking flavor and fleeting happiness in a time when you're otherwise not that happy. And then in inverse to that, the more palatable typically it easier is to get food in. And then we can also look at like food science and see how they've made it abundantly possible for people to eat large quantities of food without stopping. So like take Doritos, for example. Like they're famous for creating the bliss point, which is essentially a point where the crunchiness, the saltiness, the fattiness, and the carbiness are so blissful that you essentially shut down that natural feedback loop that says I'm hungry and satisfied. So you just keep putting your hand back in the bag, right?
Yeah.
And if we think about like what all of this does, like if you were to get a meal and you say like, how can I make this meal the most calorific with the least amount of problem? We still want micronutrient density. So we still want some vegetables in there, also for the point of some fibrous material. Then we want something that's like non-fibrous and like really easy to pass digestion. That's like white rice.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have protein. If you really wanted to say like what's the best, most easily, digestible, it would be like a ground meat. So like mince, because it's kind of already beaten that process of chewing. So we don't have to worry about the people that just aren't chewing their food enough, which is another strategy they need to do. And then can we make it multi-sensory and multi-palatable? Like palate sensory, that is. So have something that's like, say, salty and savory. So it might be like rice with vegetables and soy sauce. And then finish with something that's got finish with something sweet. So that might be like a drink or some fruit, or even like an LCM bar or something like that. And can you also add some crunch somewhere in there that makes it a little bit nicer? But that could be your vegetables. It could be something else. You can pick or choose. But if you go multi-sensory like that, it's like the dessert stomach concept, right? Like you eat your dinner, you're like painfully full. Yeah. But then there's this other stomach that somehow fits in soft, delicious, fatty ice cream.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
So we can sort of take that and like, all right, how can we make that? That's how I typically will set people's food up. It's like, here's your savory meal. We're going to get the most of our calories out of that. We're not going to give up on fruit, on vegetables, but then let's like shift it. So you might move it into then having, say, like a small bowl of yogurt with some granola or dried fruit in it.
Yeah.
Like 2 meals in one, so much easier to eat. One thing I think actually a lot of people fuck up though is grazing. Although some people find this easier. So I will asterisk it and say, if you find grazing easier, go for it. But grazing never gives your stomach the opportunity to pass food so that you can then start that digestive process again. And I find you're better off to eat a larger bolus, because larger boluses also typically end up with faster gastric emptying too. So we actually want to have like a full stomach that empties quicker, as opposed to having a moderately full stomach for the entirety of the day.
Yeah.
Another perfect addition, man, is honestly like peckish crackers on top of a normal meal, because they're crunchy and salty as well.
Okay, yeah. And they're tasty as hell, yeah.
Tasty as hell, and they're energy dense too.
Yeah.
It's another, like you do in, again, the savory rice bowl, and then you have rice crackers on the side with jam or honey. Yeah. So easy to get that in.
Yeah.
So multi-sensory is probably the best thing to do, I think.
Okay, cool. That's something that nobody on this podcast has ever brought up before, about, all the different elements that goes into making a meal actually fucking really tasty and really desirable. Because that's the thing, whenever you're in an off season, you're eating, what did you say, 5,900 calories?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to make that food seem appealing, because even just from a digestion point of view, if it's like dried up chicken and rice all the time, you're not gonna salivate at that, and that's the first point of digestion, right? So whereas if like I've just ate and I'm nearly getting hungry listening to you talk about chicken, rice, and veggies with soy sauce,
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting one. I can't make my food too flavorsome from a herb and garlic perspective.
Yeah.
When I do that, it's too much, man. It's like going to a restaurant for every meal, and that gets sickening, right? But like, you can still pick and choose. Like, one of my meals is fairly boring, but it has elements that makes it easier. So it's like rice and chicken with carrot and beetroot. Yeah. And then I have like a raspberry cordial on the side, and then I have fruit. So like the element of the meal itself is actually kind of boring, but I put salt on it. But it's a breakup, because it's like salty rice with salty chicken, and then an occasional sweet bit of beetroot. Yeah. And I snack on the carrot while I make it all, so that I don't have to worry about that. So it doesn't really feel like it's part of the meal. And then I just sit back and enjoy the drink and eat some fruit. It's like not that hard.
Yeah, fair enough. That sounds pretty good, man.
It's all right.
And then with that 1.5 kilos of fruit and veggies, mate, some people will be sitting thinking, how the fuck is he getting that amount of the fruit and veggies in? So let's talk through, I think it was 700 grams of fruit and 750 grams of veggies. Yeah. What way would that be sort of spread out over the day, or what's your typical food choices to hit those numbers?
Yeah. So like breakfast is essentially just like fried rice, realistically. It's chicken, eggs, mushrooms, onion, and zucchini all mixed together with olive oil. Like only 10, 15 grams of olive oil, not a lot, but that's essentially that. And then there's always a piece of fruit to finish. Yeah. And then the next meal is like chicken and carrot and beetroot. And then it's finished with a piece of fruit. And like most of the serving sizes are somewhere around 150 grams combined of each. So it's 150 food, 150 of veggies.
Yeah.
My next meal is just cereal with banana. So there's another fruit. And then dinner is veggies, which is just rice. And then I do like cucumber and tomato salad on the side because I find that refreshing in the heat.
Yep.
And then I finish with that with some pineapple or something like that. And then before bed, it's just a bunch of fruit again. Nice. And that's it. That's it pretty much done, man. It's actually not that much. It's like all of the veggies are done at 4 meals.
Yeah. Okay.
In the last block, we pulled my veggies down by 150 though, because I was just getting to that stage where I'm just like, man, this is getting a bit much. You're like, if we're going to pull some volume, like let's pull it out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
But typically, if I have people like say starting their off season, I think one of the things that you can do is try and build. If you're at maintenance calories and you're starting to work yourself into an off season, you want to try and build yourself a diet that is relatively palatable with as many fruits and vegetables as you can fit in at maintenance. And then you just want to add basics, and then you just keep adding basics as you go. And so long as you can retain those, then you're good to go. I think the hardest thing you can do is try and add them in on top when food is going up. But if you're going to start with an abundance of them, we can always pull some away at the very end when we need to. But we really want to start with the most abundantly micronutrient dense and diverse diet as you possibly can, because that will set you up for digestive health and also a whole bunch of other health markers,
Yeah. And how many meals would you normally have? Did you say it was 5?
Yeah, 5 in the intra-workout carb,
Yeah.
Most of my guys do 5. I have a couple that do 6.
Yeah.
But most of them, I'd rather just do like a larger meal 5 times.
Yeah.
So that they've at least got some time between eating. Because, man, you got to appreciate, like, these meals take half an hour to eat.
Yeah.
So, like, it's a terrible business decision doing this bodybuilding thing. You basically eat longer, spend more time on the toilet, so you can't look after as many clients, and you spend more money on food. It's terrible.
Yeah, man. It's I'm only on about I think 525 grams of carbs, but I've obviously just came back from the gym and like sat down. I was like, okay, I've got about an hour and a half to Dean's podcast. Let's start making this meal. Then I was like half an hour before, and I was like, shit, like I've just sat here for an hour doing fucking nothing here. Like, I thought I was going to get some work done before I jumped on here, but it just doesn't happen when you've got like those big meals to make and sit and actually eat it and then let it digest a little bit before you start to move around. So, man, I don't know how you've hit 1,000. Like that seems alien. That's numbers I've never hit, but
it's kind of like graded exposure, I don't know if you're familiar with graded exposure, but like, if you found something uncomfortable and you expose yourself to it in a graded fashion, so like a small bit this week and then a bit more the next week and then a bit more the next week, by the time you get to the end of that phase, e.g. the end of this growth phase, the exposure has just continually gone up linearly, and then before you know it, you're like, oh fuck, how the fuck am I doing that? So when I started this this growth phase, I think I started at 3,500 calories and about 450 carb. 500 carb. And I was honestly like, I would get hungrier than what I do now, but I was never actually like that hungry even at that amount of food, because that was about my maintenance, 3,500. So it's just been that over the course of 26 weeks, we've casually added 25 or 50 grams of carbs every 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely, it's just like, like if you add 50 grams of carbs and some of that's honey and some of that's rice, it's like, it's really only this much more food, or for the people that are listening, it's like a handful of food.
Yeah.
So then you just have a handful more, and then you have a handful more, and then a handful more. And then before you know it, you've gained about 15 handfuls worth of food, but it's taking you 26 weeks to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas, and that is one piece of advice that is, I think, super important for people. And I'll steal this term from Broderick Chavez, and he used this for drug use, which is longer, lower, and slower. That's his sort of motto around how you should set up pharmacological intervention for people that are trying to grow using those things, right? Longer, lower, slower. It's healthier. It's more controllable. You get to the same destination, if not a better destination. You'll get there slower, but you'll probably be healthier for it, right? And I think food in an off season is exactly the same. Like if you pull information on the research on what you require, or listen to people that in the know, like Lyle McDonald, on what you require to actually grow muscle tissue, it's like 150 calorie surplus. Like it's tiny, man. But the problem that people do is they want to gain 5 kilos tomorrow. So they go from the 3,500 and they go straight to 4,000 or 4,500. And like, there's no graded exposure in that situation whatsoever, including metabolically. Like you haven't had the chance to adapt to that. So you go to 1,000 calorie surplus tomorrow. How much of that can you actually accrue with muscle tissue? It's pretty small.
Yeah.
If we've said that you only need 150 to grow tissue, then what's the other 850 doing?
Yeah.
Some of it's going to be burnt. Some of it's just going to turn into fat,
Yeah.
And then you're also abundantly full because your food's gone up 30% tomorrow. But if you just bump at that 150, that 200, you accrue some tissue, you let adaptation play, then you bump it another 100, you let the tissue accrue, and you bump it another 100, 20 weeks down the track, you've only gone up 1,000 calories, but you've gone up 1,000 calories in an adaptable way whereby the adaptation you're actually seeking is the specific one that we're putting that demand on, which is just growth. So there's less opportunity for fat gain and a greater opportunity for you to become like exposed to the stimulus of more food and training in a manner that doesn't seem like it's that interruptive to your current situation.
Yeah. And that's clearly worked, man, because you got to 114.5 and you're very tight still, with the physique that you've got. You look like, you're just still very solid. Like, I can't think of the word to describe it, but you're just in fucking killer shape now for that amount of weight gain. So clearly going lower and slower for longer like that has led to a body composition that, is favorable because you're not just, you don't have tons of abdominal fat or love handles or anything like that, which again, is probably, do you think that's something that holds people back where they maybe jump too high with this, then they get frustrated because they have gained the fat and they don't stay there for long enough and then drop back down? So like you're kind of like deteriorating the effect of the off season by doing that.
Yeah. They gain 10 kilos in 10 weeks and then they're not happy with how they look or feel. Because like, you got to appreciate too, like as you gain weight, that total stress or that allostatic load on your physique rises with every bit of weight you add. And, if that allostatic load drives up sufficiently enough that it then starts to push blood pressure and decrease cardiorespiratory health and all the rest of it, like that 10 kilos is going to hurt, man.
Yeah.
Like the 13 kilos hurts me. Like I'm only starting to slowly adapt to it probably a little bit more this week. Like whereby like my feet are always sore, my lower back was always pumped, I'm always out of breath, like that kind of shit.
Yeah.
But if I'd have put that 13 on tomorrow, I would feel way worse and it would obviously be worse composition. But the thing that people need to appreciate is the weight that places the demand on the physique, not necessarily the composition. Like I know you've had Luke on here before, Luke Lehman, and him and I have like laughed and gone to town on people online about how BMI is still an effective tool to, give you a relative risk for comorbidity around cardiorespiratory and cardiovascular health, because it's a weight that's placed on top of the physique and it doesn't really matter where it's coming from, but I think people jump too quickly, then they get uncomfortable and then they go back and they seesaw their way to like a couple of kilo gain. Whereas if people were genuinely just willing to put in the work and let the results come to fruition over time, like if we're only talking, even if I said to you tomorrow, right, like you can gain 200 grams a week, you're like, that's pretty shit. But do it for 52 weeks.
Yeah.
Like that's 10 kilos of lean tissue.
Yeah.
And like who puts 10 kilos of lean tissue on in a year?
Yeah. That's it.
Very little people, right?
Yeah.
I think that is hugely the biggest problem that a lot of people have, especially in the PED using group, because by virtue of taking drugs, people want to be bigger than they've ever been and they want it to happen fast. So you're dealing with people that perhaps need like a little bit of psychological support for the most part, as much as they do the coaching, for the physiological demands.
And Dean, do you work with any females or is it mainly males you work with at the moment?
Mainly meals. Mainly, that is what I do. Just mainly meals. Mainly males. I have a few females still on my roster. I quite like working with girls, but I'm going to actually move towards just doing dudes after these girls are completed with their approaches.
Yeah. And then does this differ in terms of what a female and a guy will go through in an off season? Because obviously weight gain for a female 9 times out of 10 is going to be more of an issue than a guy. Like you put 10 kilos on a guy, if he's got a little bit of a stomach and some love handles, he's not really going to curl because he's going to feel bigger. He's going to fill his t-shirts out a little bit better. It doesn't really affect him as much versus a woman who maybe adds, 4 or 5 kilos. She might start to feel a bit, chubby and like not herself with everything. Have you found that?
Not to mention the social pressure,
Yeah.
We as men get a way easier run at this in regards to gaining muscle. It's acceptable for us to be fat socially, especially in the world. Like if you're talking about in the fitness world, it's even worse, girls are up against it because they've got a much harsher eye on them. However, if girls can divorce themselves from that social expectation and just hone in on what they need to achieve, we'd have a lot healthier females probably competing at with a lot better physiques in regards to like muscle over a certain amount of like skeletal, bone mass. If they were prepared to just hold a little bit more body fat, preferentially knowing that they could perform better over time. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that. And then you got to think about too, like I said to you, 200 grams. Like for a female, it might be like 100, it might be 50. Yeah. So like now we're talking about like really small numbers. So they've got to be like relentless and just okay with slowly but surely working those calories up and slowly but surely adding that lean tissue. And it might be even longer because the availability of calories for them is lower as well. So the problem with that is like you've got a female who's just on average 65 to 70 kilos and their maintenance is like 2,100. And then you put them into 22 or 2,300. Because they're at 2,300 versus you and I might be like, say, 4,000, our availability for error in regards to calorie control gives us a greater opportunity to grow muscle tissue and get less fat, because if we make mistakes, it doesn't have as big of a percentage, as a female does too. So they get double shot in the foot there. It's the same inversely for fat loss. Their available runway to pull calories for fat loss is so fucking tiny compared to like us as men. Or us as bigger people. It's really not sex specific. It's just size specific there.
Yeah. And when you've worked with females in the past or currently, what's the sort of highest numbers, just to give any female listeners, like what's the highest you've seen a female be able to eat in an off season and still be able to perform and still look good at the same time?
Like there are obviously genetic anomalies, but one of my girls right now, I prefer to do calories per kilograms. I think it's more relative, right? Okay, like she's on like 430 grams of carbs a day, 7 days a week, no cycling. I will say this for girls that are watching social media, it's been my experience that a lot of calories that people discuss online, especially when they're trying to give off this elitist sort of outlook that they're eating an abundance of carbohydrates, a lot of them are just talking about high days, and they also have 3 or 4 low days. So it's not a consistent intake, and there's this mythical sort of unicorn at the end of the runway that says, oh, look, these girls are eating 500 grams of carbs. I'm like, 3 days a week. That's not the same. But this girl, she does 430 a day. But her relative calorie intake is like 44 times body weight.
Wow, okay.
Like most women maintain at around 30 to 35 times body weight. Most men are 35 to 40 times body weight, and she's 44 times body weight in calories. So she's way up there, man. She's like 40% above the average. And I imagine she will diet on fairly similar calories. In that she'll be slightly higher. She won't be dieting on those calories, but like if a female might end up at say 22 to 25 times body weight at the end of a dieting phase, she might end up at 30. So she'll still be the same relative percentage higher.
That's fair. It just gives the female, because we obviously just spoke numbers for guys here a lot, so that gives them something to think about. But mate, let's finish with the whole, like our sort of summary. So if you're going to give like 3 tips for maximizing your off season, whether it's mental, with your food, with your training, with hiring a coach, whatever aspects, what would you think would be the 3 biggest takeaways from this?
All right, I would say gaining muscle is slower and harder than keeping it in a fat loss phase, so it requires more attention than even in a prep. That's my overreaching comment, because I think a lot of people take the off season a little bit lackadaisical, and because of that, they don't put on near as much tissue as what they should, because they think they've got an abundance of calories. Oh, I've just got to train. Like, no. You must progress the stimulus. So that probably be the second one. You must progress the stimulus, and the stimulus has to be, you've got 3 available vectors to you. If you are an enhanced athlete, you've got food, you've got training, you've got drugs. There's got to be some level of a progression so that stimulus becomes novel to drive further adaptation. But be patient. Don't start tomorrow and go from 3,000 calories to 4,000 calories. And also don't start tomorrow doing 200 megs a test and then starting at 1,000 megs tomorrow. Like, that's just silly shit, So be patient. understand that it's harder to grow muscle, so you're going to need a longer time to grow muscle than you are to actually get it off in a fat loss phase. So if you're prepping for 20 weeks, that means you should be at least dedicating 30 plus weeks to a growth phase. And then you also need to consider health. So there might even be a period in there of 2 or 3 months where you're just sort of holding stagnant. So now if we're talking about like a growth phase followed by a fat loss phase, we're talking like 50 weeks of commitment to the first part and then 20 weeks of commitment to the second part. So we can already see that the growth part's like 66% of your time in a season for a bodybuilder versus the other. And that probably elongates even further for a natty because the adaptation's far slower.
Yeah.
What else would I say? I actually think it's been a really good learning curve for me as an individual to eat this amount of food as opposed to just prescribe it. And my experience has been really focusing on maintaining really high level micronutrient density and diversity because it's for sure made the process better in regards to gastric quality and gastric digestion. So don't underestimate the importance of fruits and vegetables in a gaining phase as well. Everyone wants to eat an abundance of them in a fat loss phase because they're hungry, but don't omit them too early in a gaining phase because it'll cost you too.
Yeah, perfect, man, perfect. And let's finish, mate. I was going to bring this one up earlier, but let's talk about the highlight of your Instagram stories. Let's talk about Dean's dishwasher stacking method.
That's so funny. Actually, I have one more before I say this. I'll say your reps in reserve that you think is a 1 is probably a 4, so train harder. That would be my other piece of advice.
Yeah,
my dishwashing stacking, mate. There's a method to my madness. I think bowls should start centrally and go laterally, and I think plates should start laterally and come in centrally. Because it makes no sense to me to have a bowl on the outside because it takes up too much space.
Yeah, absolutely.
This man, Liz is a terrible dishwasher stacker.
We all just like to have our own little methods, right? Where the way we like to do it, and if anyone fucks with that, it's
like, man, I set the
trouble.
fridge up a certain way. I'm a bit of a weirdo, man. I used to block and so I used to work in the supplement industry, and it was important you would block and face the supplements, right? Like, so they had to face forward with the label. And man, I fucking used to block and face my spice rack alphabetically.
Yep, that's nice. I like that one as well.
You know what? It's like, what do I want? Cinnamon today. Cool, that's on the left. You know.
Yep.
You know, I want ginger, so that's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And I don't know a spice that starts with Z, but I know that's on the right. You know.
I mean, you're talking sense here, right?
But Liz just walked in and just went fucking boom, just blew the whole thing up, and now I've lost a bit of my OCD. It's probably a good thing.
Yeah, man. I think after I seen your post, I was like, this makes sense with the dishwasher. I'm gonna start doing this where in the cutlery basket, all the knives go in one little thing, so you just grab them. It lasted about a week, and I was like, this is a really good system, but I can't stick to this level of OCD.
Oh man, yeah. I see. This is actually an interesting argument for how like a little bit of organization and effort actually gives you more freedom.
Yeah. Or
it gives you more time. Like a lot of people are like, I can't do that because like it takes too much time. Like, yeah, but you save time afterwards, you know?
Yeah.
But most people, again, they want that fleeting reward, man. They just want to be able to chuck it in there and forget about it. Whereas I'm thinking like, fuck, I don't want to have to unpack this, you know?
Yeah.
But I actually had 2 guys say, this makes so much sense. I've always wondered how to stack a dishwasher properly. And then they changed. And weirdly, there was no girls that wrote back and were like, yeah, I do this too. It was all dudes who were like, my fucking girlfriend.
So maybe it's a guy's OCD thing with the dishwasher. Maybe that's our realm. And then the girls are just putting them in everywhere. Maybe if people have got this far in the episode, if you can screenshot right now and comment, tag me and Dean and comment as to whether you have a system for your dishwasher stacking, that would be great, guys, because then we can put this to bed, especially if you're female. Let's see if this theory works out. Is it just a male thing or is it a female thing too?
Yep, systemized dishwashers, man. It's the way to be.
That's it, man. That's it. Well, mate, that was a good way to end it, a bit of a lighter note. But there's been tons on here, mate. Like even stuff that I haven't considered before with like making the foods more palatable in the off season and different ideas on that. It's been hugely beneficial. So no doubt the guys will benefit from this. Just shout out your Instagram there, Dean. I know you've got the business one and your own personal one. So shout them out and people can follow.
So the business one is just flex_success on Instagram. all of our business stuff goes through there. There's quick links on there if you want to check out consultations and coaching and all that jazz. And then mine, I don't even know what mine is, man. Just my name, I think, Dean McKillop.
Yeah, probably is, I think. Yeah.
I tried to change it to something cool at one stage on Instagram, but then I realized it changed my whole fucking name instead of like just a little bit beneath it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's just Dean McKillop.
Okay,
I can't imagine there's many others of me out there. So
yeah, and if anyone's struggling to find you, you can just I follow you, so you just type Dean in and they'll get straight to your profile. And I think I follow both pages as well. So if you're struggling, guys, just give us a shout. And Dean also has a good podcast called the Flex Success Podcast. If you do like these and you're running out of things to listen to, hit them up and give them a follow. They do post out some really good content on there as well, guys. So get following, get tagging, guys. And if you enjoyed it, let us know, tag us, especially with the dishwasher thing. That's going to be the main thing we want to find out after this. And yeah, guys, have a great day. Thank you, Dean, for coming on. And I'll speak to you soon, buddy.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. If you liked this episode, then please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and share this on your social media. We'll see you on the next episode for more no-nonsense advice to help you supercharge your efforts in the gym, in the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. See you then.